Interested in cryptocurrencies, but don't know how to get started or which projects are worth investing in for the short term, medium term, or long term? Leverage human experts, data, and machine learning to become a better crypto investor with Tokenmetrics. Sign up with my link and get 10% off and secure your financial future with cryptocurrencies now.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. We're gonna move on, and this is the part that will be aired on BitTube and the other censorious channel, larger censorious channel. And what I want to do, Alex, I just want to start talking about Assange and Snowden. And I know you're involved in the campaign for Assange. Anything you want to say about where we're at with that?
Well, first of all, we're at an absolutely crucial stage now in the legal proceedings, because on Monday the 7th of September, the extradition case resumes, the extradition hearing resumes at the Westminster Magistrates Court, which confusingly is not in Westminster, but let's put that issue aside. And it's now becoming increasingly clear, I think, that this court that is being convened is going to decide to extradite him. I mean, I say that with grave concern, but it seems that we are now dealing with ever more bizarre legal processes. We've had this new superseding indictment, which is clearly intended not to really add anything to the charges against Assange, but to smear him by trying to make out that he's some kind of computer hacker, which he isn't. And there's even talk, bizarrely, of releasing him and then re-arresting him so that the case can proceed under this superseding indictment. So we're now looking at a very, very rundown now to a decision to grant the extradition request. And then, of course, we're going to start on a new round of proceedings in the appeal courts.
And what are the details of this new indictment? What is he being accused of?
Right. The essential thing to understand is that the indictment that's being brought against him is still based, all of this is all based on one set of charges. This set of charges all relate to the Espionage Act. The US Espionage Act is this extraordinary, peculiar act dating from 1917. It's never really been amended. The judicial authorities on it are extremely poor, very little jurisprudence. It's incredibly oppressive. It's probably unconstitutional, though it's never been tested in that way. It doesn't allow a public interest defense. Its basic argument, the basic argument that's been made, is that by obtaining and publishing classified information, he was engaging in espionage, even though he is not the head of a intelligence agency. He's not working for a foreign power, but a journalist. And of course, the United States authorities deny that he's a journalist. They say that he runs a private intelligence agency, which they say is an intelligence agency that he set up, saying that it was for the people. That's what they say about it. But this new indictment that's now been issued, though it makes all the same allegations as the previous indictment under the Espionage Act, it introduces a whole list of what lawyers call recitals. That's to say narrative, which is not part of the actual case, which makes out that Assange is a computer hacker or that he was involved in hacking. Now, he's not actually charged with any offense of hacking. He's simply facing this, recitals. And the intention is clearly to damage his reputation even further, and also to draw attention away from the fact that the case under the Espionage Act is extremely weak, because it is a clearly political case. Any case under the Espionage Act would be, by definition, political, and Britain is not supposed to extradite people who are charged with political offences. So that's in a nutshell the nature of the case.
Okay, and how do you think it's likely to play out? What does it look like for him? And then moving on to what can people do if they want to get involved, if they want to support him?
Right, briefly, I think the first thing to say is that there's going to be, as I say, I will be very surprised if this court that he's in front of now is going to make any other decision than that the extradition request should be granted. He has a right of appeal. He can take it to the High Court of England, beyond the High Court of England, to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. The judges in the High Court and the judges at the Supreme Court are of a completely different and immeasurably superior caliber to the judge who is hearing him now. I'm talking, general. We're talking about the top judges. They might be more sympathetic to him. They may be more concerned with the law. So it's not over by a long way. What people need to do, because I could say this as somebody who once worked for 12 years in the Royal Courts of Justice in the High Court, is that what goes on outside the court has a major impact on what goes on inside the court. So it's a question of publicizing the case, talking about it to your friends, telling them that this isn't a case of some sort of sex abuser. This has been completely discredited. He's where he is because powerful governments want to put him away because he exposed some of the criminal acts that they were involved in, and try to get publicity for him, and trying to get the very powerful NGOs that, like Amnesty, for example, to take up his case. They've resisted doing it up to now in any meaningful way, trying to get it into the media, trying to arrange protests. If you're a member of a union, try to bring it up in your union, because unions are very important in mobilizing support for people. And it does have an effect on what judges think. If they sense that public opinion is running in his favor, bearing in mind that this is a political case, that will predispose them to be more favorable to him. So it has to be fought at both levels. It has to be fought in a political way as well as the legal one.
Alexander, can I ask you a question? I'm thinking about the timeline of the appeal and all the rest of this. So this is the decision's going to come down soon, this month, this week? Right. Okay.
No, we're talking about several months, I would guess.
Okay, so it will happen after after all this will happen after the election.
Yes.
That will change, I think. That may change the tenor of the case as well, all depending on how the election turns out.
Absolutely.
I don't think Donald Trump is the guy driving this.
No.
I don't think Trump is favorably predisposed towards Assange, nor do I think he's favorably predisposed towards Snowden either. But at the same time, I don't think it's a hill for him to die on either.
No, I agree with him.
And so, I think that this also, again, ties into all of this stuff where there's so many things that are in play that are just being pushed as far out in time as possible in order to get them past election day or inauguration day, depending on your version of the scenario of what happens with the US election, in order to try and maintain the political status quo.
Yes.
And I think and we're gonna keep coming back to this point, I think, over and over and over again throughout the rest of this talk, no matter who we're talking about. You're talking about Merkel or Flynn or any of these people. They're all focused on how do we get past the election and then see where the chips fall.
The election is absolutely crucial because, of course, Donald Trump in the past has talked about pardoning Assange. I mean, that was a long time ago. Yep. I agree, he's not really sympathetic to Assange at all. But I don't think he's particularly hostile to Assange either. I don't think he's interested in Assange, actually.
And he's been briefed by people about what the actual case is, and and I think he knows enough that that's yet another reason why. It's just another small reason, another brick in that wall as to why they want to knock him down and get rid of him and move on. But
correct.
Much bigger picture
Absolutely. But the timeline is very difficult to say. We got this particular judge that he's before now. I doubt we're going to have a decision from her this year, probably in January. And then we're going to have the appeal proceedings in the High Court. They might take as much as a year. So we've got a long, long way. And the poor man, Assange, of course, is in Belmarsh prison, this absolutely tough and relentless prison. He's been repeatedly denied bail, which is outrageous, by the way, completely outrageous. But, he is trapped in the Kafkaesque legal labyrinth that is the British legal system.
Kafkaesque is a great word for that.
Yeah.
Alexander, thank you so much. Thank you. And if there's an organization that people can get involved in a campaign or whatever, if you
there is. I'll send you to it. There's several actually. There's a sort of semi-official campaign for him. There's also various committees and things of that kind, and there's various support groups that are now organised. I'll provide you with details.
Great, thank you. I'll put it in the description below. And allied to that is there was a ruling this week. About Snowden. The Supreme Court ruled that the government broke the law with their mass surveillance. It's unconstitutional. Any commentary on that?
Well, it completely completely vindicates the argument that Snowden was making. Snowden's point and the reason why he leaked what he did was that he felt very strongly that what was going on and what he was himself involved in, this bulk surveillance, was illegal and unconstitutional, and he didn't want to have any part in it. I mean, he was, by the way, and this is a point to make about Snowden, a deeply patriotic American. I mean, I've spoken to people who know Snowden, and they say that he was and still is that. But his patriotism, his conception of America, is of an America based on the freedoms of the Constitution. He has a very strong libertarian side. So he did not want to work for Big Brother. And he felt that what Big Brother was doing was profoundly wrong and unconstitutional and illegal as well. And of course, he was prosecuted for that. There's been all sorts of charges brought against him. Interestingly, not, by the way, under the Espionage Act. And he's been hounded around the world, and he's been forced to accept asylum in Russia, which is not what he wanted to do at all. And of course, the Supreme Court of the United States has now said he was right all along. He was absolutely right. It was unconstitutional. It was illegal. But despite the fact that his concerns were correct and justified, the authorities are still unrelenting. They still apparently intend to pursue him. And when it was floated about a week ago by Donald Trump that he might actually pardon Snowden, as I'm sure you both remember, shock, horror, Democrats, liberals, all of these people who supposedly care about human rights are saying how terrible that you should even think about pardoning this wicked traitor. So, I mean, that's the extraordinary reality, this upside down looking glass world in which we live. There are genuine libertarians, there are genuine people out there who really do care about this thing. You mentioned, I think, was it Ron Paul? Who says he should be Rand Paul, who said it should be pardoned. Well, I mean, we know what his stance is, but of course, the so-called liberals once again have demonstrated how completely illiberal and intolerant and relentless and fascistic they really are. They truly are.
No, it is fascinating to watch this play out. And from again, I take all of that is correct, and then I take a step back and I look at it and I say, and how many people are watching this going, how transparent are you in your wickedness at this point? So much of what has happened in our favor over the last 4 years has been just Trump standing there as like a bulwark and just saying, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And then him refusing to bow to the pressure, and other people just refusing to bow to the pressure. And all they can do is continue to out themselves more and more and more and just show their true face of what rampant, disgusting authoritarians they actually are. And there's no better way to red pill people than to use the common parlance, than for them to see the depth of their depravity in person. So that and it could be as simple as Nancy Pelosi going to a hairdresser's to get her hair done at a salon whose business has been ruined by policies she implemented. And she still supports in the most vociferous way imaginable for her own political gain. That red pills a lot of people. It takes a lot of people who have been sitting back going, I can't be that bad. Because most of what we do in this life, the great thing about humans, and not just humans, but in apes in general, but humans, is that we have massive empathy. It is empathy. It is our ability to empathize with the person on the other side of the table, right? Which allows us to understand what they're seeing and what they're feeling so that we can then communicate. That's the basis of our communication. Empathy is all of that. And so we also tend to project that empathy, and by the psychopaths who run our governments use that empathy against us to make us believe, oh no, it couldn't possibly be that bad. You must be some crazy conspiracy theorist. That's their first line of defense. It's the first instance they're probably lying to you. And we see this over and over and over and over again. And eventually people have a higher tolerance for this stuff than, say, I do. I have zero tolerance for it. I see it immediately. I assume they're lying to me, and then I have to be proved. You have to actually prove to me that they're not lying to me before I'll accept it otherwise. But that comes from years of just being myself, and then from years of being proven correct and getting I get the noradrenaline and dopamine hit every time I'm right by just assuming that everybody's lying to me, right? So it's the same thing in reverse. But once you start breaking that down, right, that's what led to the election of Trump in the first place. That's what led to Brexit, and that's what's continuing. That's what's fueling now the massive protests against the virus in Germany.
We're going to come to that whole movement. I want to move on. I'd like either or both of you to comment on a couple of other court cases, which is one about Michael Flynn and what the appeal court ruled there, and then also a little bit about Kevin Clinesmith, and then that I think both of those tie into the argument that you presented at the beginning of the show, Tom, that we can then go into how that plays into everything, and also we're going to touch about Russia. Russia and Novichok. I was wondering if the Russian vaccine, if maybe it's got Novichok in it. That's what makes it so.
Well, the Michael Flynn thing is really quite simple. I mean, in strategic terms, they're just trying to keep him under wraps and incapable of speaking in public until after the election, where they can then bury him.
This is exactly right.
That's all this is. It's all just legal wrangling. I was watching Viva Fry go over all the legal ins and outs of this, and he just done a wonderful job on it. And he made the point the other day is like, I don't understand why this is being done this way. Why did Emmett Sullivan, the judge, why did he do this, knowing full well that the writ of mandamus would probably get granted, and then he would appeal again, and then en banc, the appeals court would send it back to him, telling him this is what you need to do, so go and do it. Well, notice that he's now going to do that after November 3rd.
Yes,
that's all this is about. It was just about extending the timeline out until because what you're watching in real time are people who are desperate and who are literally drowning as their stuff, as things fall apart, trying to grasp at whatever straws they can to hold on to a narrative for as long as possible. That's all they're doing. And that's what the saga of Michael Flynn is at this point.
I mean, it is a completely grotesque case. Tom has described it exactly right. That is exactly what the agenda is. But just take a step back and think about the implications. Sullivan is supposed to be a judge. He's a judge who presides over a criminal trial. Is not supposed to decide whether someone is innocent or guilty. That's not his job. That's the job of the jury. It's also the job where there has been a plea of guilty. It is the job of the prosecution and the defense together. If the prosecution and the defense come together and say to each other, well, look, this plea of guilty was clearly based on a completely false premise, and it was, by the way, because he wasn't given all the papers, he wasn't informed of everything, his own previous lawyers shafted him, we have all the information, then it is not for the presiding judge to step in and say, well, you know, I think that Eastman's guilty after all, and I'm not going to let him change his plea, and I'm thinking about sentencing him, and I'm going to have, somebody, another lawyer step in to advise me as an amicus and all of this kind of thing. It is absurd. It is ludicrous. It is beyond shocking. Yeah. So
Alex, hold on, let me get this. So what you're saying, it's not the job of a judge to be the prosecutor. Is that what you're saying? That's so radical, Alex.
It's not the job of a judge to be a prosecutor.
Alex, please, you're engaging in wrong things. Stop it.
It is not the job of a judge to be a jury, right. Except in certain legal systems. Right. If you went back to Soviet Union circa 1937, where the judge follows the party line and is instructed by the central committee what his decisions were. And by the way, there's a very, very interesting historical book by an American historian called J.R.H. Getty, which goes into all of all the mechanics of the Stalinist show trials. Then, of course, you can be both judge, jury, and prosecutor, because that's what you are loyally supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But in the United States, supposedly a democracy, supposedly a constitutional state, you are not supposed to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's what Sullivan is doing. It was taken to the DC Court of Appeals. A three-judge panel ruled against him entirely rightly, and then it was set aside on appeal en banc, in an en banc case, by a panel of which most of about 8 out of 2 were in fact Democratic appointees. Incredibly, it wasn't actually Sullivan who sought that rehearing before an en banc panel. It was one of the judges of the appeal court itself. I have never heard of in my life. I mean, this is so ludicrous and absurd. So yes, Tom's got this exactly right. This intention is to drag this out as long as possible, keep it under wraps up to and beyond the election. They know that sooner or later, if you know, this thing goes on for indefinitely, Trump will pardon him. But they want certainly to get it to keep it under wraps beyond the election. But think what it is exposing in the meantime about the state of the judiciary and of the legal system in the United States.
It's absolutely correct. And you take it one step further and you realize that that not only is it that, but it's also politically what they're trying to do is they're trying to force Trump's hand to pardon him so that they can then use the talking point, well, he was never acquitted in a court of law, he was acquitted politically, and Trump made a political decision, so they can always throw shade back on this thing, even though the judge is acting in no way is the judge acting legally. And they're going to force this to the Supreme Court, at which point we're going to find out again, as always, whether John Roberts, which I know he can't, pass the dead hook or high boy test as to whether or not he's going to uphold the Constitution or, you know, or fail it, because we know how this is going to, we know how that goes, and it's because that's what Roberts does. So, and then they'll have a precedent for this action, and then we'll be done with the rule of law in the United States. And that's the big thing that we really have to deal with here, which will force Trump to pardon him, and then Pelosi will try and impeach him for pardoning him, and then it'll just continue to go on as these people screech incoherently and hope that something eventually sticks, when the truth of the matter is that the only way that's going to happen is that they can get control of both the House and the Senate at the same time and force Trump into a move which is so unpopular that they can get enough Republican senators to boot him out of office. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and just from that, because it's something that I thought about, Tom. So the risk is if the Supreme Court decide in favor of Sullivan, then it sets a legal precedent that in future cases would allow judges to act as juries and as prosecutors, citing this case.
Absolutely, of course it would.
It's insane.
It would, because the system is based on precedent. The only court that would be able to set aside that precedent would be the Supreme Court of the United States. But until that moment comes, which may be in 10 years' time, or 20 years' time, or 100 years' time, it is the law. And I can say with a little bit of certainty here that it won't be more than 10 years, because what will happen is that you will see the United States, which is also the plan here. It's just to destroy all of the institutions that function in the United States in order to atomize it. So as no matter who wins here, no matter who loses here, or no matter who wins, we lose. Because the whole purpose of this is to undermine all the institutions. It's to undermine the judiciary, to undermine the electoral college, to undermine the voting system, to undermine everything, to undermine DAs and state attorneys and governors and everything else, and force a dissolution of the United States itself. That is ultimately the goal here, because the transfer of power has to happen where it moves from the United States to the European Union and turn us into a bunch of neo-feudal cash cows. That's who we are in the grand scheme of things. That's what we are.
Okay, coming to that, any comments about the Clinesmith case, Alex?
Well, it's difficult to know exactly where this is going. I mean, first of all, Clinesmith, let's be quite clear, is guilty. I mean, there's any question about this. He's pleaded guilty. I mean, there's no question about this. He faked an email in order to get a FISA warrant. I mean, it is extremely serious, but he was actually prosecuted on a fairly narrow charge, and he gave this mumbling confession in which he said, yes, I did commit this crime, I am guilty, but I hadn't intended to do any harm, and I didn't really think I was misleading anybody, which is inconceivable, by the way. I mean,
we're going to use the FISA court, which is already like marginally constitutional in the first place, and we're going to lie about it. But I didn't intend any harm.
I didn't really intend any harm.
I did my axe in his back, but I did not actually intend to harm him.
No, Tom, we're just talking about three letters. I'm just thinking for myself, because I've written statements to court in child protection proceedings. And I could say, okay, so we have evidence that this person has been convicted of these offenses against children. They have this record. I could write, this person has not been convicted of child offences. It changes everything.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to.
Right.
Mean to. Whoops.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
Bad.
this has just slipped in.
Well, exactly. I mean, it is ludicrous. Now you can. Now the big question is though, why did the Justice Department allow him to come to court and plead guilty in that way? Now there are two theories. Theory one is that they're not really very serious about pursuing the Russiagate, the investigation into the investigators. That's one theory. Theory two is that Clinesmith has done some sort of a deal. I tend to go with the second theory. At least, I mean, that's partly because I want to. I mean, there's no question about it. But I mean, I tend to think that. I mean, the important to understand about this is that he faked this email in the fourth. There were 4 FISA warrant applications that are involved. This is actually faked for the last one, the 4th one. And I think the more interesting ones, the more worrying ones from a from a legal point of view are the previous 3, especially the first. Now he was involved in all 4, and he presumably knows, because he was an absolutely key player on the legal team, who was involved in all the previous 3, especially the first one. So I hope, and I want to believe, that in fact he's been let off rather lightly because the Justice Department investigators, Durham and Barr and all the others, are more concerned to find out who was really behind the first FISA warrant. But that's a hope rather than anything
well, it's
else.
not really. I don't think it's a hope, Alex. I think when you do the motive means opportunity, when you do the SWOT analysis, or however you want to put it, when you just ask who benefits, of course they're going to throw the small fish back in order to get the larger fish. It just makes perfect sense. You have to think like a prosecutor, think like an investigator, think like a cop, and now it shouldn't be too hard to think this is bigger fish to fry here. There's a bigger problem to solve. There's a bigger criminal to catch. We're going to continue to talk about without naming names until we get to the next section of it. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And I haven't given this much thought, to be honest with you, beyond the initial thing, simply because, oh yeah, he's a small fish. Whatever he's going to do, that's fine. We're going to move. This is just part of the fabric that's being built to entrap the person that needs to be dealt with.
Yes. I mean, that is my feeling also, actually. And by the way, we will come to, in this program, a discussion of who those people were, because we now have a lot of information which has come to light.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this will tie in, I'm sure, Tom, to your premise.
Sure.
That this is, and this, we can move on to the US election as well, and what's happening there, the state of the US and Europe. That this is being done in order to prevent Trump, one, being re-elected,